The site, which would become known as Upper Marlboro, was first settled in Prince George's County near the end of the 17th century. Charlestown, an official port town on the Patuxent River, was the seat of local government at that time, and a small courthouse was constructed there by 1698.
The original courthouse or courthouse site was selected on a knoll overlooking a navigable waterway. That was because not only did the people travel throughout the colony, and it was a colony back then, by water, by boat, but that all of the trade and all of the agriculture was conducted by, they moved all of the either supplies in or their produce out by river.
In 1706, the town of Marlboro was formed in Maryland's Prince George's County by the Act for the Advancement of Trade and Erecting Ports and Towns. In order to distinguish itself from Lower Marlboro, located on the other side of the river in Calvert County, Marlboro soon came to be known as Upper Marlboro. By 1718, the population and commercial viability of Upper Marlboro began to flourish, so much so that after numerous petitions from local residents, the General Assembly agreed to relocate the county courthouse from Charlestown to the burgeoning community of Upper Marlboro. The new courthouse began its service to the community in 1721. By 1747, vast tobacco fields dotted the landscape, and an act for amending the staple of tobacco named Upper Marlboro a tobacco inspection warehouse. With easy access to the waterways of the Patuxent, the harvest and transport of this major cash crop allowed Upper Marlboro to continue its ascent toward affluence and importance.
This county was a major tobacco producer in which they shipped the tobacco to England. It was so much a tobacco economy that many people were paid in what they call hogshead. I understand that had nothing to do with pigs, but it had an awful lot to do with a quantity of tobacco. So you would see old records that would, so many hogsheads for this or that, and that referred to the tobacco trade. And if you travel up and down the Patuxent River, you'll see a lot of old homes, and they're all facing right on the water's edge. And that, again, is to do with the fact that that's how people travel.
The original courthouse remained in this location until 1880, when a new site was selected for the construction of a courthouse on Main Street in Upper Marlboro.
The courthouse was begun in 1880, finished and opened in 1881 on the site where our courthouse now stands, or at least the old part of our present courthouse now stands, fronting on Main Street. And at that time, an architect named Frankie Davis from Baltimore was hired to design a high Victorian brick building, a very ornate building. He had a building committee of men from the Upper Marlboro area, one of whom was Charles Claggett. And it was actually the oldest part of that 1880 building that was the victim of the fire in November of 2004.
Bringing back into my memory being on the wagon coming down from Weston 2 miles from the courthouse to Jake Edlovich's general store to get all of the needs of Weston Farm, and the horses had been tied in back of Jake Edlovich's store, and I had been lifted out of the wagon and put on the ground when a flock of geese came by, and the gander in charge of the geese got after me. I ran through the store, across the dirt road separating the store, directly across to the columns that were decorating the courthouse, and I ran around those columns, and that's my first memory of the columns that were put there by Charles Claggett back in 1881.
With the expansion of the railroad system to the area in the late 1800s, new markets opened up to the town's agricultural products, continuing Upper Marlboro's development as the true cultural and economic center of Prince George's County. The modernization of small-town America followed the railroad's newly laid tracks, and Upper Marlboro's growth reflected this trend.
If we wanted to go to Marlboro or to Hyattsville, we had to go on a dirt road. And the roads were worked by horses. There were no tractors in those days for the road machines. And that didn't last too long before they took the horses off and pulled the machines by the tractors. We didn't get electricity until the 20s, and we didn't get it over here until in the 40s when we got it here. And we got it close to the railroad. The inhabitants got it off the railroad when the WVNA was electrified, and that made a big difference to those people.
My memory of the road when I came in on the wagon, and for many, many years, was that it was a dirt road. And the dirt road became paved in 1927 when the Robert Crane Highway was dedicated and the monument was put at the south end of Marlborough to Robert Crane Highway. So the change of dirt road to gravel road occurs by way of what you might say population necessity and easier access to the courthouse at Upper Marlborough to preserve its location there, and everybody else could travel and get there when they were scheduled to do so, whether as defendant or as plaintiff in whatever might be the case.
With the road infrastructure in place, the still diminutive courthouse saw an ever-increasing demand for its services.
Very small building. Parking lot was in the front front right-hand corner of the courtyard. There was a place for about 6 cars to park, and that was it. The street was very narrow. It was paved. But there was parking on both sides of the street because the cars weren't very big, so they could get by each other. Very old and very, very rustic, I would say. It had one courtroom and a clerk's office and a treasurer's office and the sheriff's office, register of wills. There were wood steps that went upstairs to the courtroom. There was one courtroom. We had one judge. Shortly after I came there, Judge Marbury was put on the bench. He was a state senator, then he became the circuit court judge while I was almost after I got there.
The courthouse was more than a home for the judicial system to the townspeople of Upper Marlborough. It was a central part of everyday life.
Before movies came, before television, before any other source of entertainment, people would flock to the courthouse and be a part of the adjunct to the jury or adjunct to whatever the proceeding was by way of administration of justice. But it really became the center and focus of all activity that put its taproot deep enough to survive as a county seat to and inclusive of today.
Before there was a county administration building, before the county government moved to the Kennedy Center-like building across the street, this was the government. Everything was here. Everything started and stopped here of any consequence in this county. The courts were here, the Board of County Commissioners were here. Everything from license plates to murder cases took place here.
They would have night court in the Washington metropolitan area overseen by the United States Commissioner, who at that time was Samuel H. Malloy, who became a circuit court judge in Prince George's County. And literally every Saturday night they'd have night court. And they would come down and recruit people from land records to serve the roles of various people who got in all kinds of mischief on the Suitland Parkway because that was a federal highway. And the story always was they never had to play roles because this was in real life what happened in their own spare time when they were in land records.
I clerked for Judge William B. Bowie for 1 year. That's all the contract was for 1 year. I and one other law clerk went across the street, rented an office space on Main Street, and hung out our shingle. I've been here ever since. I practiced law for almost, well, in excess of 10 years on some Main Street in Upper Marlborough, looking out of my office to the front of that courthouse almost every day. So I have a warm feeling for that facade, as we refer to it.
It was the soul and embodiment of government. It was a structure that you knew was important, that important things took place here. It was the courthouse.
The courthouse changed numerous times from 1721 through the early 1900s, but the building boom between the First and Second World Wars led to its most extensive renovation to that date.
That courthouse has seen many, many changes, but the most noticeable one, of course, was in 1940, when the Victorian appearance of the north front of the courthouse was completely changed, and the very large portico with those powerful columns was erected, changing the appearance of the courthouse from a high Victorian ornate brick building to a more colonial-looking classical building. And that was our courthouse until all the additions were added on the south side, which now, of course, dominate the oldest part of the building.
There were two major expansions to the rear of the courthouse in 1949 and 1960. In 1991, the additions of two large east and west wings were completed, named for Judges J. Franklin Bourne and Ogle Marbury. In addition, the oldest central portion of the courthouse was renamed the Duval Wing in honor of Gabriel Duval, a Prince George's County resident who sat as an associate justice on the United States Supreme Court from 1812 to 1835.
The Duval Wing, for years, was drafty. Although they had air conditioning, it wasn't effective. The courtrooms in the summer were sweltering hot. You'd have to have the courtroom windows open in order to get ventilation, and so the people could just sit and conduct trials. But we didn't have the option of closing anything down and doing renovations until they built the Bourne Wing and the Marbury Wing. That's what we refer to as the new part on the back of the Duval Wing. Once that was done and completed, then there was an option. We had enough courtrooms, we had enough chambers, we had enough clerk space, we had enough places for our jury assembly in order to undertake the renovation, which was long overdue in the Duval Wing.
In 1900, Prince George's County had a population of 30,000, and by 1950, that number had jumped to almost 200,000. With the turn of the century, the courthouse serves over 800,000 citizens, and that number increases every day.
I can remember a courthouse where everybody knew everybody. It was then, as it is in some respects now, the employment center for people of the community. But now that community is expanded, and you have, instead of people living in the upper Marlboro area or close there too, they've moved to southern Maryland, as far away as St. Mary's County or across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge to the Eastern Shore. So they're commuting great distances to still work here in the courthouse. And when I say big, I mean our population has expanded drastically in the courthouse because we now have, and I believe I'm correct on this point, the largest courthouse in the state of Maryland in terms of physical plant, larger even than Baltimore City. And of course our bench is only second largest to Baltimore City.
In spite of the tremendous growth the county has experienced, the mission of the court has never changed. The courthouse itself may have been expanded to meet the growing needs of the community, but the court remains mindful of the individual concerns of each person residing in Prince George's County.
The court needs to be sensitive to the needs of the people because as a judge, certainly you want to meet the needs of the community. You also want to dispense justice, but be fair. You can't do it without balancing that against the sensitivities that are involved with making sure that those that are before the court have an understanding of what's about to take place.
We solved a lot of problems. I remember when I was a law clerk, we had an attempted political assassination trial here when Governor George Wallace was shot by Arthur Bremer. And at a time when there were major political trials going on in America that went on for weeks, I remember the chief judge was Ralph Powers then. Judge Powers said, we're going to do this in a week, and he did. And Arthur Bremer got tried, convicted, and was sentenced all in about a week or so.
We now provide things that used to be in the realm of other agencies that now come to the third branch of government. We have to provide social workers. They're part of our staff now. We provide, of course, interpretive services, and the court must provide for these individuals and must provide for them a level playing field so that when they come into the court system, they will feel that I am treated fairly. No one wins all the time in court, but everyone should always be treated fairly and with courtesy and dignity whenever they come into that system.
see just the extent of this fire, how much it's grown now, and you've seen flames throughout the roof line of this building, right in the center of our screen.
For the first time we're beginning to see the fire equipment in the efforts to battle this. At the moment, Chance, I gotta tell you, it's far from being under control.
Okay.
At approximately 8 a.m. on Wednesday, November 3rd, 2004, temporary lighting set up in the attic of the Duval wing sparked a fast-moving fire.
I was in the conference room preparing for trial. I was Xeroxing some materials relative to the trial when I noticed thick black smoke and flames that were coming from the top of the structure of the old courthouse. My bailiff was present at the time and some other individuals. I brought that to their attention. They all looked out the window. I made a comment that I didn't hear an alarm go off at the time to have us evacuate the building, so I notified my staff to make that call, and then I prepared to vacate the building.
I remember someone saying, "There's a fire." And we looked out the window and you could see smoke coming from the courthouse roof.
At 8:26 a.m., the Prince George's County Fire and Emergency Medical Services received the first 911 call. Within minutes of hearing the alarm, Company 20 of the Marlboro Volunteer Fire Department arrived on the scene.
The bells went off, and like usual, came out to the engine room, found out what the call was for. The fire technician here said it was for Courthouse on fire. And we usually run some boxes over there for the generator on the roof. He said, "No, it's really on fire. Let's get on and go." And we got on the engine and went down the street.
I was sitting here at my desk, heard the fire alarm go off, was doing a few things before that, and then my bailiff, Mike, came in. He said, I think the building's on fire. So we went to another office and looked out the window. And just about that time, the battalion chief from the fire department had pulled in on our side of the courthouse. And you could see him get out of his car. You could see him look up at the roof of the building, and you knew this was a serious fire at that moment.
The fire quickly intensified and had become so large it required the assistance of many outside departments. What had started as a one-alarm fire quickly became a four-alarm blaze.
Everybody showed so much emotion about what was happening in the town and the courthouse. Everybody realized at that point that we were really had a possibility of losing part of our history.
I was distraught, to say the least, when I saw the fire. I was able to park at the county administration building, and then, of course, lo and behold, became, as many others did, an innocent bystander, simply sitting there helplessly watching the courthouse that I loved and played in as a child go up in flames.
More than 100 firefighters, racing in from as far away as the Eastern Shore, worked tirelessly for more than 90 minutes to finally extinguish the inferno. Despite their best efforts, the rising flames, fueled by 30-mile-per-hour winds, eventually destroyed most of the roof and wooden interior of the newly renovated wing, leaving behind no more than the smoldering ruins of a once proud and historic edifice.
We're up on the level right above the fire, looking over the roof, and you can look over and see the front ramp of the firehouse. There's a fire hydrant on the front ramp, and an engine from Bladensburg was pumping water, and that's when I really realized how many people were actually here operating on it at that time.
All of the businesses in the community started bringing over water, refreshments, food, anything they could do to make sure the fire department had everything they needed to get the job done that day. That was neat to see the community come together the way it did.
Once the flames had been subdued, the white iconic columns, still recognizable in spite of the devastation surrounding them, were left alone to stand guard over the ravaged brick building.
There were some very historical parts of our courthouse that just would never be the same again. The courtroom where Arthur Bremer was tried for shooting Governor George Wallace was totally destroyed. The original courthouse in the front of the building was totally destroyed, and the bell tower collapsed through it.
I remember standing beside a young law clerk of mine, telling him, "Well, there goes your office," and it went up in flames. As I can remember back some almost 40, well, it was more than 40 years ago that I had stood there looking for a job doing the same place.
Everyone that witnessed the fire that day felt a combined sense of tremendous loss and deep sorrow.
How saddened I was that a piece of our history was gone. The building can be refurbished, it can be rebuilt, portions of it can be replaced, but it will not be the same building.
I know judges that were excited about moving back in there, and I was looking forward to seeing how the building was restored. And hearing the fire, I was saddened because I loved the building, and I was afraid that perhaps it wouldn't be restored and it would just be demolished at that point. So it was a very sad day.
While saddened by this tragedy, the citizens of Upper Marlboro looked to the future with the anticipation of the courthouse being rebuilt and seeing it return to its place of prominence on Main Street.
It would be nice to have some of the flavor that was there before the fire. And even though the county has grown in numbers and there's somewhat a metropolitan aspect of it, you can't get rid of the old history of Marlboro, the farmland and tobacco farms. And that building stood there for many years, and I'd like to see it restored, maintaining that old integrity.
What's really important to the people, and that makes any system work, no matter what the facility, no matter where, it's the people who make it work. It's easier with a good facility, and we're going to have a great facility when it's all said and done, I'm sure.
It is a great day. It is a great day indeed, for we are witnessing the reopening of the Temple of Justice here in Prince George's County.
November 3rd, 2004, we were excited about this building almost coming to a conclusion with the renovation. And on the way to work that morning, I was faced with a billowing cloud of black smoke over Upper Marlboro and the courthouse engulfed in flames. It was horrifying. However, out of the ashes have come this incredible building. Some of the unique technologies are the docket displays in the entryway so that the public, lawyers and the like can see where their cases are scheduled. We also have Court Smart in all of the courtrooms. There's two main art pieces in the building that were commissioned by the Arts and Public Places panel. The first piece is called Justice. It consists of stained glass panels that greet you when you come into the building. They symbolize the 4 levels of the court system in this state. They symbolize the diversity of this county and the justice that is meted out in this courthouse. On the second floor, the artwork is done by Mr. Steve Weissman, and it's a huge piece that's encased in the copper that came from the original Duval wing, and it's called Justice Prevails. And it's a symbol of Lady Justice coming out of the Duval wing burning in the background.
For the citizens of Prince George's County, it is critical to understand that we are dedicated to ensuring full and fair access to justice. And this building and all of the work that had to go into making sure that it came to fruition is a symbol of that commitment. And that in the business of government, we are all partners. And this is an example of what partnership can do.